what we're going to do is continue with the trig ratios. This time we're going to be looking at three other trig ratios. So last time we looked at sine, cosine, and tangent. Sine was opposite over hypotenuse. Cosine was adjacent over hypotenuse, and tangent is opposite over adjacent. Now we're going to look at cosecant, which is the reciprocal of sine, r over y, or hypotenuse over opposite. Secant, hypotenuse over adjacent, and then cotangent, adjacent over opposite. So what we're going to do is we're going to take this triangle and we're going to find the 6 values for angle A. Now, one of the problems is we have two sides. We're missing the third side. So we're going to use the Pythagorean theorem. 3 squared plus b squared equals 5 squared. That would be 9 plus b squared equals 25. B squared equals 16. So that means that b equals 4. So we have our missing side. Now what we're going to do is we're going to find our 6 trig ratios. So the first one is sine. And with sine, what we have is our opposite side, which is 3. And our hypotenuse, which is 5. Cosine is going to be adjacent over hypotenuse, so 4 over 5. And tangent is going to be opposite, which is 3, over adjacent, which is 4. Now, for the other 3 trig ratios, cosecant, that right there is the reciprocal of sine, so it would be 5 over 3. Then we have secant, which is the reciprocal of cosine, which would be 5 over 4. And then what we have is cotangent. That would be the reciprocal of tangent, so that would be 4 over 3. So those are our 6 values for angle A. Now what we're going to do is we're going to look at our triangles, and instead of being given an angle and a side, we're given 2 sides. And what we're going to do is we're going to find the missing angles and the missing sides. So with this right here, I'm going to call this one angle A. And what I'm going to do is I am going to use my opposite side and my adjacent side, and that would be tangent. So I'm going to go tangent of A is equal to 8 over 15. Now, in order to get the A by itself, I do inverse tangent. So that means that I'm doing tangent to the negative 1, and then that would be 8 over 15. So with this right here, what I'm going to do is I'm going to, on my graphing calculator, find the inverse of tangent of 8 over 15. And I'm going to round it to the nearest degree. So I'm going to have 28 degrees. Now I know that this is 90, and I know that all the angles in a triangle add up to 180. So if I take away the 90, that means there's only 90 left. 90 minus 28 gives me 62. Now what I'm going to do is I'm going to find my missing side. I'm going to use the Pythagorean theorem. So I'm going to go 8 squared plus 15 squared equals c squared. 64 plus 225 equals c squared. That gives me 289. And then when I take the square root of 289 gives me 17. So let's look at the next one. I'm going to do the same thing. I'm going to say this is my angle A. This is my opposite. This is my adjacent. Opposite and adjacent is tangent. So I'm going to go tangent of A is equal to 7 over 12. I'm going to use my inverse tangent again. So in my calculator, I'm hitting the inverse button of tangent, and then I divide the 7 and 12. And what that does is it gives me 30 degrees. I'm rounding it to the nearest degree. So it's close to 30. It's not exactly 30. So I'm going to put this as 60. I'm going to use the Pythagorean theorem again. 12 squared plus 7 squared equals c squared. 144 plus 49 gives me c squared. And that right there gives me 193. And then when I take the square root of 193, that gives me 13.89. Or you could leave it as the square root of 193. For the third one, same process. First thing that I'm going to do is I'm going to find the angle. I'm going to call this one A. And so what I have is my adjacent side and my hypotenuse. Adjacent and hypotenuse is cosine. So I have cosine of A is equal to 5 over 9. I'm going to do the inverse cosine in order to find it. So I'm doing second cosine on my calculator. And that right there gives me an angle of 56. So when I subtract 180, remember this is 90, so that gives me 34. And for the last one, sorry, I shouldn't say the last one, but for the missing side, I have a squared plus 5 squared equals 9 squared. That right there would be a squared plus 25 equals 81. I subtract the 25, and what I get is a squared equals 56. So if I take the square root of 56, that would be square root of 4 and square root of 14, which is 2 square roots of 14. Or you could give the decimal answer, which would be 7.48. Pause the video and try the next three on your own. So with the letter D, once again, I'm going to call this A. And this is my opposite over my hypotenuse. That would be sine. So sine of A is equal to 2 over 5. I'm going to do the inverse sine of 2/5. And then that right there gives me an angle of 24 degrees. So if this is 24 degrees, if I subtract from 180, the 90 and the 28, that gives me 62. And then I'm going to find the missing side. So 2 squared plus b squared equals 5 squared. That would be 4 plus b squared equals 25. I subtract the 4 and I get b squared equals 21. When I take the square root, what I would have is b is equal to the square root of 21, or we could write it as a decimal. And that right there would be 4.58. Letter B, I'm going to call this one my A. So I have my opposite over my adjacent. That would be tangent. So tangent of A equals 5 over 9. I am going to do the inverse of tangent. So second tangent of 5/9. And what that gives me is 29 degrees. So if I go 180 minus 90 minus 29, that right there would give me 61. And I'm going to use the Pythagorean theorem. 5 squared plus 9 squared equals c squared. 25 plus 81 equals c squared. That right there would give me 106. And then if I take the square root, one answer would be 106 if I kept it as an exact. Or if I wrote it as a decimal, it would be 10.3. So for letter F, I'm going to call this angle A. This is my adjacent over my hypotenuse. Adjacent over hypotenuse is cosine. So cosine of A equals 4 over 11. I'm going to do inverse cosine. And I'm going to go 4 divided by 11. And that means that A is equal to 69 degrees. So that means my other angle is 21 degrees. Now for the Pythagorean theorem, I have a squared plus 4 squared equals 11 squared. That would be a squared plus 16 equals 121. When I subtract the 16, what I get is 105. I'm going to take the square root, and I could either have the answer of the square root of 105, or that would be 10.24. 1 or 2 decimals is good.